The first time you notice it, you probably won't. It's a flicker. Something in the eyes that doesn't match the words. The child says, "I'm sorry," but the face is flat. The apology arrives with perfect timing, but the eyes are already scanning the room for the next thing. You tell yourself it's a phase. Shyness, fatigue, a rough day at school. But here's the problem with that flicker. It's not random. It's a circuit. And when that circuit stays open past a certain age, around 7 or 8, the brain starts wiring around empathy instead of through it. By age 12, the missing piece isn't missing anymore. It's been replaced. If you've ever watched a child deliver a perfect apology and felt a cold stillness underneath, like the words were memorized, not felt, you know the unease of sensing something the child's own face refuses to confirm. What you're sensing is measurable, and it has a timeline. Let's back up, because the evidence starts earlier than most parents realize. In 2007, a team at University College London ran a landmark study on children aged 6 to 12. They measured what's called affective empathy, the ability to actually feel what another person feels, not just recognize it cognitively. The results were stark. By age 10, the gap between children who could feel empathy and children who could only mimic it was already neurologically fixed. The mimic group had learned the script, the right words, the right timing, but their anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex showed no activation when they witnessed someone else's pain. Their brains had learned an alternative pathway. A bypass. That gap, your OFA, fixed by age 10 Daxapis, is the single most important data point in this entire timeline. If you want to understand how a child's neural architecture resolves before most adults even notice the pattern, subscribe to K01. We keep dissecting the wiring behind the behavior. And in the comments, leave one word: bypass. If you've ever sensed that alternative pathway in a child you know. Now consider what that means in real time. Picture a 7-year-old who pushes a classmate off a swing. The classmate cries, the 7-year-old walks over, says, "I'm sorry you got hurt," and then goes straight back to swinging. The words are there, the pause is there, but the pause is empty. No hesitation, no shift in posture, no lingering glance at the crying child's face. The apology was a transactional output. It is a button pressed to reset the situation. Most parents miss this because they're looking for the word, not the wiring. They hear "I'm sorry" and mentally close the file. But a child who hasn't internalized the feeling behind that word by age 7 or 8 is building a brain that treats other people's distress as information, not as something that matters. You've done this. You know you have. You've accepted an apology from a child because the word was said, even though something inside you whispered that the apology felt hollow. That whisper is your own anterior insula trying to tell you the signal didn't land. Trust it, because the flip side is far more dangerous. There's a second pathway, one that gets activated when a child not only fails to feel empathy, but actually experiences another's distress as pleasurable. In the same UCL study, a small subset of children, roughly 4%, showed activation in the ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, when they saw someone else in pain. These children weren't just cold, they were wired to find suffering satisfying. This isn't evil, it's a wiring error, but the difference matters less than the outcome. A child who feels nothing when you cry becomes an adult who can watch violence unfold without a physiological response. And a child who feels pleasure when you cry becomes an adult who may learn to generate that feeling deliberately. Here's where the timeline solidifies. Multiple longitudinal studies, including a 15-year follow-up published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry in 2019, tracked children from age 5 to age 20. The results converge on a single window. Between ages 7 and 10, the empathy circuit either solidifies or it doesn't. After age 12, interventions that try to build affective empathy from zero have a success rate under 15%. The brain has already chosen its default pathway. So what does ignoring this sign cost? By age 12, the child who learned to mimic without feeling has a fully operational social mask. Now, they can say the right things. They can cry on cue. They can even articulate remorse in therapy. But the fMRI tells a different story. Their amygdala barely flickers when they see someone in pain. Their insula remains quiet. They've built a fluent, socially calibrated exterior over a silent core. They look like everyone else until the moment empathy is actually required. At that point, they execute the scripted behavior instead of the felt response, and the people around them, including their own parents, feel a subtle wrongness they can't name. The relationship slowly frays. The child becomes harder to reach. The natural feedback loop, you hurt someone, you feel their pain, you learn not to do it again, never closes. If this pattern sounds familiar, it should. You've seen it in headlines your whole life. The teenager who hurt someone and showed no remorse. The adult whose apology was perfectly timed but left everyone cold. The partner who seemed to know exactly what to say but never actually changed. You've seen the pattern from the outside. What you're now seeing is the wiring underneath it. The childhood sign isn't cruelty. It's a neurological architecture that treats people as objects, and by age 12, that architecture is mostly finished. You've now seen the hard data on the critical window and the cost of missing it. If this kind of forensic analysis is what you came here for, subscribe to KOA1. We don't stop at the visible crime, we track the circuit that made it possible. And in the comments, write silent core, because that's what we're actually looking at when the mask is perfect. But here's where the script takes an unexpected turn. Because the answer isn't to watch for cruelty. The answer is to watch for something far more subtle, the absence of a specific response that most parents don't even know to look for. And once you know what that response looks like, the timeline becomes something you can work with. Not after age 12. But before. Let's look at what the neural data actually shows. The empathy circuit has three main stations. The first is the amygdala, which detects emotional signals in other faces. It's the region that goes active when you see someone cry. The second is the anterior insula, which translates that signal into your own felt experience. It's what makes you wince when you see someone stub their toe. The third is the medial prefrontal cortex, which evaluates the meaning and guides your response. In children who develop healthy empathy, all three stations are online by age 7. In children who don't, the amygdala and insula remain under-responsive. They receive the signal and then discard it, because the signal never gets translated into feeling. The giveaway isn't cruelty. It's a consistent lack of resonance. Here's the specific thing to watch for. When a child watches a video of someone experiencing pain, a cartoon character getting hit, a real person crying, their facial muscles should briefly mirror the expression. That mirroring is called somatic resonance. It happens automatically. If you film a child watching emotional content and then slow the footage, you can see their own face flicker into the same expression within a fraction of a second. In children who develop empathy normally, that mirroring is present by age 4. In children who later show low affective empathy, the mirroring is either absent or delayed by more than half a second. Their face remains still while someone else is in distress. The automatic connection between seeing and feeling never fires. This is invisible to the untrained eye, but it's measurable. And it predicts outcomes with significant accuracy. Around 80%, according to a 2015 study from the University of Michigan. Now, what does this mean in the everyday life of a parent? It means you don't wait for the big moments, the violence, the bullying, the obvious cruelty. You look at the small ones, the 5-year-old who doesn't look back at you when they see you're hurt, the 6-year-old who delivers a perfect apology and then immediately returns to playing unchanged, the 7-year-old who can describe how someone feels but never seems affected by it. You now know more about what actually drives a child's empathy development than 90% of the people who sit in parent-teacher conferences. That isn't arrogance, it's data. The question is, Aichale, are you ready to keep looking at what the system ignores? Because the system, schools, pediatric offices, even many therapists, still looks for the wrong thing. They look for antisocial behavior, hitting, stealing, lying, destruction. Those are late-stage signals. By the time a child is showing antisocial behavior, the wiring is already years past the critical window. The early signal isn't bad behavior. It's a detached face at the wrong moment. It's a child who watches someone fall and doesn't flinch. It's the absence of the natural, automatic, empathetic response that most children can't help but show. And so the question every parent should be asking isn't, is my child mean? The question is, does my child's face change when someone else's does? That question, does my child's face change when someone else's does, is the single most practical screening tool a parent can use, and it costs nothing. But it requires paying attention to the one thing most parents are trained to ignore: silence in the face of someone else's pain. Here's the data point that should change how you watch. In a 2017 study from the University of Cambridge, researchers showed children videos of emotional scenes and tracked their eye movements. Children who later developed strong empathy looked at the eyes of the person in the video within the first half second. Children who showed low effective empathy looked at the mouth or the hands, or anywhere but the eyes. They were gathering enough visual information to mimic a response, but they were deliberately avoiding the one region that triggers the somatic resonance circuit. The eyes, it turns out, are the entry point to the anterior insula. If a child learns to avoid the eyes by age 6, the insula never gets the signal it needs to develop properly. Watch for the gaze, not the words. Eyes that scan past emotion are eyes that have found a workaround. Now, the objection comes quickly, but what if my child is just shy? What if they're sensitive and look away because they care too much? That's a valid question, and it's the reason most real cases get missed. The difference is in the timing and the quality. A shy child looks away and then looks back. Their gaze returns to the emotional scene, checking and rechecking. A child in the low empathy group looks away and stays away. They don't need to recheck because the emotional signal never registered as meaningful in the first place. The difference is not looking away. The difference is what happens after they look away. That difference, looking away versus looking away and staying away, is the threshold that separates a shy child from a neurologically bypassed one. If you want to keep training your own detection system, subscribe to K01. We're mapping the invisible architecture that most people walk past every day. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever seen a child whose eyes looked away and never came back? If this scan sounds like it's describing a specific kind of child, one you've met, one you've read about, one you've sensed in a classroom or a family gathering, you're not wrong. The child who never flinches grows into the adult who never changes, and the system around them keeps accepting the words instead of watching the face. This scan doesn't just explain one child's wiring, it predicts the next one, and the one after that. We've known for a decade what to look for: the flat face, the absent mirroring, the eyes that never land on the eyes, but we keep pretending. Empathy deficits are a moral failure or a parenting error instead of what they are: a neurological architecture that was years in the making before anyone noticed the first sign. The sign was always there. The question is whether we learn to see it or keep accepting the apology while ignoring the face that delivered it.